On this episode of the Klamath Armory Wrestling Podcast, we travel back to November 1935. After several weeks off, wrestling returns to the Armory and brings with it one of Klamath Falls' favorite wrestlers, Pete Belcastro. Welcome to the Klamath Armory Wrestling Podcast, the podcast that covers the history of pro wrestling at the Klamath Armory and Auditorium in Klamath Falls, Oregon. My name is Grant Pachoco, and now, on to the show. Episode 2, November 1935. Wrestling fans in Klamath Falls had to wait over 3 weeks to get word on when wrestling would return to the Armory. Finally, on November 7th, 1935, the Evening Herald ran a story with the headline, "Belcastro will feature Matt Card here on Tuesday." Of course, they were talking about Pete Belcastro. According to WrestlingData.com, Pete Belcastro was born on January 25, 1909. His birthplace is listed as California, and the papers often billed him as being from Sacramento. The first record of Pete Belcastro wrestling in Klamath Falls was back in 1933, and he had wrestled just a month or so prior on the last Legion Hall card in September, so Armory fans were well acquainted with him. At the time, Pete Belcastro was the recognized Pacific Junior Heavyweight Champion, having become the inaugural title holder a few months earlier on July 5, 1935, winning a 2-day tournament held in Medford, Oregon. The title would go on to have a storied lineage, with a few world-famous names such as Danny McShane, Pepper Gomez, and Nick Bockwinkel holding the title. The paper reported that Belcastro's opponent on Tuesday, November 12, 1935, would be Rudy Myers of Los Angeles, and their match would be one half of a double main event. Not a lot of information on Rudy Myers on the internet, so if anyone has some, please reach out. Johnny Seuss, who the Herald called an aggressive Indiana wrestler who lives in Klamath Falls, would be taking on Jerry Marcus of New York in the other main event. Johnny Seuss, real name Harold Edwin Davidson, was born in Carlisle, Indiana in 1908. His first recorded wrestling match took place on December 4th, 1933 in Marion, Ohio, where he defeated Toots Estes. His final match would take place in Eugene, Oregon in 1957, where he was wrestling under the name Buck Davidson. Jerry Marcus was born April 14, 1905, and had his first recorded pro match on December 3, 1934, in Honolulu, Hawaii. He'd continue to wrestle through 1952, having his last match in Salt Lake City, Utah, on May 15th of that year. The article ends with mention of the return of the Mean Marine Bob Kenaston, but says his opponent in the opening bout of the night had yet to be named. The next day, the paper ran a photograph of Pete Belcastro with his Pacific Junior Heavyweight title belt and announced that he would return to Klamath Falls on Friday to begin training for his match against Rudy Myers. It is noted that Belcastro is a touring wrestler known for his drop-kick victories, but he will not be risking his title on November 12th. His opponent, Myers, is noted to have a 5-pound weight advantage over Belcastro, coming in at 185 pounds. The match between Johnny Seuss and Jerry Marcus is plugged again after a brief article, and Bob Kenaston gets his opponent in Tiger Johnson of Los Angeles. On November 9th, 1935, the Evening Herald runs what can only be described as a travelogue of Pete Belcastro's recent 8-week trip to Mexico. According to the article, Pete Belcastro wrestled 21 times over the 8 weeks, and he never lost twice to an opponent. His only defeat was to Nick Lutz, but Pete Belcastro beat Lutz in their return match in Mexico City to, as the paper said, keep his record clean. During his journey south of the border, he wrestled 5 times in Mexico City, 3 times in Guadalajara, 3 in León, and 2 each in Morelia, Clea, Pueblo, and Guanato. He also made stops in Agua Caliente and San Luis Potosí. He is said to have beaten the Mexican champion Toro Hernandez in 2 straight falls, but he was not allowed to leave the country with the title. Pete Belcastro put the Pacific Junior Heavyweight title on the line 4 times during the trip without a defeat. In Moriella, the article states, Pete Belcastro had to defeat an unnamed local favorite wrestler 3 times in a row before the crowd would let him leave the ring. They apparently didn't understand that 2 out of 3 falls meant a victory. The travel diary ends with a note that in Mexico City, Belcastro trained with Henry Burke, who was a former resident of Klamath Falls. Now, I report all this because it is in the paper, but none of these matches are listed on WrestlingData.com. But there is 7 weeks and 5 days time between his last recorded match, September 20th, 1935, and November 12th, 1935, so it could all be true. A separate blurb on the sports page that day runs down the card once more. It also includes a picture of one of the 6 wrestlers, but does not say who it is. I'm thinking it's likely Pete Belcastro, but I cannot be 100% sure. On Monday, November 11th, 1935, the Evening Herald ran down the card again and said that advance ticket sales for the show the next night indicated that another large crowd would be in attendance. As a side note, I should say that on Monday, November 11th, 1935, Armistice Day, the Klamath Armory had its official dedication. Page 6 of the paper had a rundown of the events, which included many speeches from judges and colonels. The dedication proper was done by Major General George A. White. The Major General gave a passionate speech that warned against the dangers of pacifism, urging residents to live in a reality that included war. A band played some songs, and some races were held, including a roller skate race and scooter races. Only one dog showed up for the scheduled dog race, so officials decided that the dog would race his owner. The boy, Bobby Jones, won the race. The Klamath Armory was now officially dedicated. The day of the show, we got a bit of insight on wrestling's return to the Klamath Armory. Apparently, the attendance at the boxing events had been getting smaller and smaller over the past few weeks, leading promoter Mac Lillard to come to the conclusion that Klamath Falls was a wrestling town. Pete Belcastro's trip to Mexico is touted again in the article, and then it is reiterated that the Pacific Junior Heavyweight title will not be on the line. The paper says that Pete Belcastro is the favorite to win the match later that night, but makes it clear to say that his opponent, Rudy Myers, is not an underdog. The paper called Myers both fast and clever. Of the Johnny Sues and Jerry Marcus match, the paper says that Sues is at a disadvantage height-wise going into the encounter and will likely use Sonnenberg rushes and his dangerous pile driver off the ropes to topple his taller opponent. Finally, we learn that Tiger Johnson, scheduled opponent of Bob Kenaston, has been injured and will not wrestle. Instead, Kenaston will tangle with Frank Sutey, a 200-pounder from Colorado. That night, the opening match saw Bob Kenaston beat Frank Sutey with a reverse headlock in 12 minutes and 25 seconds. Not much else is written about this match, but it is good to see the Mean Marine not get disqualified for a change. The first fall of the second match ended in 9 minutes and 10 seconds when Jerry Marcus made Johnny Sues submit with a leg split hold. Sues fired back in the second round, winning the fall in 5 minutes and 30 seconds with a pile driver after 2 Sonnenbergs, aka flying tackles. According to the paper, Johnny Sues turned bad boy in the third fall, wailing away on Marcus with fists and knees. After repeated warnings, the referee, Ray Frisbee, had no choice but to disqualify Sues and award the final fall and subsequently the match to Jerry Marcus. The opening seconds of the main event between Pete Belcastro and Rudy Myers saw Belcastro tear out of his corner and send a dropkick flying at Myers. But it missed, and the junior heavyweight champion crashed to the mat. Myers wasted no time in pummeling Belcastro with fists to the back of the head before picking him up and delivering a body slam that won the first fall in just 60 seconds. The brief rest period between falls was good for Belcastro, as he was able to get his wits about him and go into the second fall at a much more even keel. Myers and Belcastro battled evenly throughout this fall, and it could have gone either way. Belcastro found his opening, and his dropkick found its mark and was quickly followed by 2 more. The third dropkick dropped Myers to the mat and gave Belcastro the chance to even up the score, winning the second fall in 9 minutes and 30 seconds. Pete Belcastro went into the third fall with the upper hand, and after a series of flying wrist locks and a body press, Belcastro won the deciding fall in 4 minutes and 37 seconds. Another night of wrestling had come to a close at the Armory, and fan favorite Pete Belcastro was victorious. On Thursday, November 14th, 1935, the sports page of the Evening Herald proclaimed a triple main event for next week at the Klamath Armory. Mac Lillard had wasted no time in signing wrestlers for this Klamath Falls first. The article led with the promise of the return of Leslie Wolfe, described as the figure 4 scissors ace from Texas. According to WrestlingData.com, Leslie Wolfe, or Les Wolfe, began his career in February 1930 in Waco, Texas. His last recorded match took place in December of 1946. Leslie Wolfe wrestled under a mask at times under the names Masked Red Devil, Mystery Mike, and just Red Mask. In 1942, he lost Red Mask's mask in a 2 out of 3 falls tag team match against Red Berry and Jack Steele in Tulsa, Oklahoma. The paper announced that Leslie Wolfe will be taking on Johnny Sues on November 19th in a 60-minute match contested under the Australian round system. 6 10-minute rounds with a minute of rest between each round. A fall will automatically end the round. Also returning to the Armory on November 19th would be Toots Estes, and he would be taking on Pete Belcastro. These two had never tangled in Klamath Falls before, though Estes had won a match between the two in Medford, Oregon several months prior. No doubt, Belcastro would be looking to beat Toots here. Lastly, the paper reported that Jerry Marcus would be taking on Dick Craddock of San Francisco, and their match would also be fought under the Australian round system. On Friday, November 15th, 1935, the Evening Herald ran down a list of the first times that'll be occurring at the Klamath Armory on November 19th. It will be the first time there has been a triple main event in Klamath Falls. It would also be the first time the Australian round system would be used in the city. It would also be the first time Pete Belcastro and Toots Estes would clash in Klamath Falls, and be the first time that Leslie Wolfe and Johnny Sues would meet in the ring. It would also be the first time Dick Craddock had wrestled in Klamath Falls. The paper reported that fans were excited for the return of Leslie Wolfe from several weeks of wrestling in Salt Lake City, as well as Toots Estes returning from wrestling in California, but said that the bulk of the excitement for Tuesday's card was no doubt the debut of the Australian round system, which the paper called a novelty. The Evening Herald also briefly explained the rules again, so fans would be ready. On Saturday, November 16th, 1935, the Evening Herald ran a caricature drawing of Pete Belcastro wearing a crown bearing the word champion. Surrounding him was a comic strip showing Belcastro as a football star and a marksman. At the bottom was a drawing of a wrestling ring in disrepair with broken turnbuckle posts and ropes and strewn with wrestlers and chairs. A man in the ring, dumbfounded, is asking, "Cyclone hit here tonight?" A man outside the ring replies, "No, Belcastro was here tonight." The article next to the illustration promised the clash of two minor champions of the Pacific Coast. Pacific Junior Heavyweight Champion Pete Belcastro and Hawaii Heavyweight Champion Toots Estes will, as the paper says, settle regional differences when they meet in the top bout on Tuesday night. The article reiterates that this will be the first time these two will wrestle each other in the city limits, but brings up Estes' previous win in Medford. The paper calls both wrestlers young, fast, and clever. The article then goes on to talk up the 60-minute Australian round rules match between Leslie Wolfe and Johnny Sues. It promises the match will be one between two aggressive battlers. It mentions Sues' pile driver and Wolfe's figure 4 scissors as moves to watch out for. The article wraps up by plugging Jerry Marcus versus Dick Craddock. Not much more is said except to state that this too will be an Australian round rules match. Not much new information about the card is given in the Monday, November 18th edition of the Evening Herald. It runs down the card, plugging Belcastro and Estes mostly, and mentioning the Australian rules undercard. The one new tidbit we get is that Pete Belcastro will not be defending the Pacific Junior Heavyweight title during his match with Toots Estes. It also again mentions Belcastro's trip to Mexico and says that he returned from the journey a much improved grappler, as proven in his win over Rudy Myers last week. The November 19th, 1935 edition of the Evening Herald goes into full pitch mode for the event later that night. The subheadline even gives the start time at 8:30 p.m. The article runs down the card from the 2 out of 3 falls 60-minute encounter between Belcastro and Estes. It also goes through the Australian round system rules, noting for the first time that 2 straight falls will end the match. The match using those rules between Les Wolfe and Johnny Sues was also promoted. Now, eagle-eared listeners may have caught that I didn't do much of a biography on Dick Craddock when his name was mentioned. That's because, as the article states, that Mac Lillard was told that morning that Craddock could not appear. Filling in to face Jerry Myers will be Frankie Peck of San Francisco. The paper reports Frankie is a former prize fighter, but made the jump to wrestling 4 years prior. There's not much information on Frankie Peck on WrestlingData.com. His first recorded match is in December 1934 in San Francisco, and his last is in September 1937 in Santa Rosa, California. It seems he mostly stayed on the West Coast throughout his 3-year career. Frankie Peck did well in his Klamath Falls debut, beating Jerry Marcus in 2 straight falls. In the first fall, a head scissors gave Peck the victory in 35 seconds flat. The final fall came in the 3rd round when Peck floored Marcus with a body slam in 5 minutes and 52 seconds. Les Wolfe's figure 4 scissors was the hold of the night in the second match between the Texan and Johnny Sues. Wolfe locked Sues in the dreaded hold in the second round, and it looked like Sues was going to give, but the bell ending the round saved him. 1 minute was not enough time to recover because Johnny Sues soon found himself back in the hold at the start of the 3rd round, surrendering in just 2 minutes and 15 seconds. Sues, injured so badly by the figure 4 scissors, was unable to answer the bell for the start of the 4th round and forfeited the match, giving Les Wolfe the victory. The first fall of the main event between Pete Belcastro and Toots Estes made up for the brevity in the prior matches. Both Belcastro and Estes were said to have both been working at top speed to gain the advantage. Belcastro missed a dropkick and landed on his head. He recovered enough to toss Estes from the ring and catch a breather. Estes, groggy from his tumble to the floor, climbed back into the ring and straight into a hold Belcastro said he learned while in Mexico City, the Mexican Deathlock. The hold gave Belcastro the first fall in 19 minutes and 5 seconds. The second fall, shorter than the first, saw Pete Belcastro lock Toots Estes in a Boston Crab. Estes saw an opening, and he was able to convert the crab into a double arm lock and body press, and gave him the fall in just 3 minutes. The third fall started out with Belcastro and Estes rushing each other with double Sonnenbergs. The two collided head-to-head, and both fell from the ring to the armory floor. Neither man could answer Ray Frisbee's count, and the match was ruled a draw. The paper notes that Estes is still one up after their encounter in Medford, so it was likely fans wanted to see a rematch. With the main event draw, another night of wrestling had come to an end. The Evening Herald noted at the end of the article that all 3 matches were well wrestled. Promotion for the November 26th event at the Armory started, as usual, the very next day. Pete Belcastro and Toots Estes would be returning, but fans would have to wait for a rematch between the two as Belcastro and Estes, along with the returning Leslie Wolfe, would all be facing 3 newcomers. Leslie Wolfe was slated to take on Ken Hollis of Little Rock, Arkansas. Pete Belcastro was slated to take on Bulgarian Tiger Taskoff, and Toots Estes would grapple with Frankie Peck. The next day, the paper announced that Tiger Taskoff would be unable to appear to wrestle Pete Belcastro on November 26th, and in his place would be Rex Mobley. This would not be the first time Rex Mobley had wrestled in Klamath Falls. The paper says he'd wrestled at Mac Lillard's old Klamath Legion shows about 3 years prior. Born in Texas, though the Evening Herald bills him from Alabama, Rex Mobley had a career that spanned from 1932 to 1957. He wrestled masked occasionally, but most often as Rex Mobley, and he held the Mississippi version of the Southern Light Heavyweight title and the Tennessee and Alabama versions of the World Light Heavyweight title, among others. He was also an NWA Southern Tag Team Champion with Henry Harrell. The paper notes that the other matches of Leslie Wolfe and Ken Hollis and Frankie Peck and Toots Estes would go on as planned. On Saturday, November 23, 1935, the Evening Herald promoted the fact that of all the 6 wrestlers who'd be wrestling at the next Armory event, only Ken Hollis was unknown to fans who'd been following wrestling in the city for years. Like Rex Mobley, Ken Hollis was born in Texas. His career would be much shorter, though, lasting only 10 years, 1930 through 1940. While he wrestled mostly in the South and in Middle America, he did make some trips out west, including this trip, which included matches in San Francisco and Seattle. He too wrestled under a mask, sometimes as Red Devil and sometimes as the Scorpion. The Evening Herald said he'd match up against Les Wolfe well, noting they weighed about the same, but calling Hollis rough and fast. Pete Belcastro and Rex Mobley would fight under Australian round rules, as would Toots Estes and Frankie Peck in the opener. On Monday, November 25th, the build-up continued. The matches were run down again as we got a little more flavor about each wrestler. Rex Mobley is said to have grown considerably as a wrestler since he appeared at the Legion Hall in Klamath Falls 3 years ago. The paper says that Mobley is regarded as one of the most promising of the younger crop of grapplers. The Herald also says Pete Belcastro has his work cut out for him. Of the 1-hour time limit 2 out of 3 falls opening match, the Evening Herald says that Leslie Wolfe will have to put his grappling skills, most notably his figure 4 scissors, up against Ken Hollis's ruggedness. But they concede that Wolfe has fought many rugged matches in the past. Frankie Peck and Toots Estes get the also-ran treatment in this article, just saying that they will meet in an Australian rounds rules match, the same as Belcastro and Mobley. The day of the show, the Evening Herald ran a picture of Rex Mobley front and center on the sports page. The caption heralded his return after 3 years and promoted his battle with Belcastro. The accompanying article labels Les Wolfe and Toots Estes as popular fan favorites for their matches at the Armory, but states that it's a toss-up between Mobley and Belcastro as to who is more popular. The paper calls the Belcastro-Mobley match dead even. The results from the Armory took the sports page headline on Wednesday, November 27th, reading, "Hollis disqualified in main event match," the headline only hinting at the action that fans saw happen at the show. When the bell rang at 8:30 p.m. on Tuesday, November 26, 1935, Frankie Peck and Toots Estes squared off in a match the paper called fast and on par with the 2 matches that followed. Peck picked up the first fall in the 3rd round, using a leg lock to get Estes to submit in 2 minutes and 43 seconds. Estes took the second fall in the 3rd round with a combination body press and headlock in 5 minutes and 6 seconds. The 3rd fall came when Toots Estes missed with several drop kicks and Frankie Peck capitalized with another leg lock in 3 minutes and 26 seconds into the 4th round. Frankie Peck's win is his 2nd straight victory in Klamath Falls. The match between Pete Belcastro and Rex Mobley was, in a word, a fight. The first fall went to Belcastro 3 minutes and 30 seconds into the 2nd round when he locked Mobley into a figure 4 scissors after leveling him with a drop kick. Rex Mobley fought back, submitting Belcastro in 2 minutes into the 3rd round with a hammerlock. In the 5th round, Belcastro escaped another hammerlock by crawling for the ropes, and when Mobley broke the hold, Belcastro hit him and delivered a body press to pick up the final fall in 1 minute and 30 seconds. Belcastro was cut open by the end of the match, the gash over his eye requiring stitches, according to the paper. The main event cemented newcomer Ken Hollis as one of the biggest heels to come along in Klamath Falls in some time. The first fall of his match with Leslie Wolfe saw Hollis gouge his opponent in the eyes repeatedly. In addition, Hollis pulled at Wolfe's nose and ears and lips as well. It looked bad for Wolfe, but he found a spot to clobber Hollis on the side of the head and then trap him in a figure 4 scissors and not let go until he submitted, giving Leslie Wolfe the first fall in 19 minutes and 25 seconds. Hollis started the 2nd round in a similar manner. Wolfe was staggering and weaving under a barrage of fists, knees, and feet. At one point, a spectator, infuriated with Hollis's constant fouls, rushed ringside and reached through the ropes to offer physical assistance to Wolfe. The fan was met with a solid kick square to the ear from Ken Hollis for his trouble. Referee Ray Frisbee continued to admonish Ken Hollis for his illegal tactics, but the warnings fell on deaf ears, and Frisbee called the match, giving the deciding fall to Wolfe in 3 minutes and 25 seconds. The fans went livid, as even after losing, Hollis wanted to continue fighting Wolfe and even charged at Frisbee a time or two as well. The Evening Herald said of Hollis, "It has been some time since an outright meanie has visited the Klamath ring, and Hollis stands out as one of the meanest. It was a wild night, and just 2 nights before Thanksgiving as well." By the end of the week, the question on everyone's mind was, who can tame Ken Hollis? The Thanksgiving edition of the Evening Herald gave us a pretty good answer. Pete Belcastro. Pete Belcastro versus Ken Hollis as the main event for the December 4th card at the Armory. The article was accompanied by a headshot of Ken Hollis with the caption, "Here he is," as if it was a wanted poster. According to the paper, on the 28th, the same 6 wrestlers would be in town for the first card of December. Leslie Wolfe would be facing Frankie Peck, and Toots Estes would grapple with Rex Mobley in the opener. Will Pete Belcastro be able to stop the terror that is Ken Hollis? We'll find out on the next episode of the Klamath Armory Wrestling Podcast. And there is November 1935 here on the Klamath Armory Wrestling Podcast. Some fun stuff happening. I wanted to talk over the rankings, but I will say it's a little difficult only 2 months in and having as much turnover as we have in the wrestlers to really get a good, solid look at rankings as there is. And these rankings I'm just doing specifically win-loss, draw, that sort of thing. So, according to my little ranking system, Andre Adoree is number 1, and that's just because he's got 2 wins, 0 losses, and his name begins with an A. Frankie Peck also has 2 wins, no losses. Leslie Wolfe also has 2 wins, no losses. Pete Belcastro coming in right after that, 2 wins, 0 losses, 1 draw. And Bob Kenaston right now coming in after Pete Belcastro is 2 wins, 2 losses, and 0 draws. So it's as I said, it's really hard to kind of get a handle on the rankings, especially when there's so much turnover from month to month. And there have been a few people who've stayed, like Bob Kenaston. He had a match this month, so it was good to get. We got some stuff on him, although he's 50-50. He's 2 wins, 2 losses. Let me say this about Pete Belcastro. As you know, when I in the 0 episode of this podcast, I talked about how I started researching 1939. I am not going to say that Pete Belcastro is in fact the Hulk Hogan of Klamath Falls. But there is a moment in 1939 where he is announced as returning and the place goes bananas. So, Pete Belcastro had been wrestling in Klamath Falls before. I think we are seeing sort of the early stages of somebody who becomes very, very popular. And it's going to be fun to see his progress from here, November 1935 to, I think it was January of 1939, and just see how big he gets in this, in this, it's not a territory, but in the city. So later on, they start calling him the Klamath Assassin. We haven't sort of reached that point yet, but it's coming, and I'm very excited to get there. And Ken Hollis, huh? Wow, Ken Hollis. We thought Bob Kenaston was the mean guy. Ken Hollis comes in, and I just love the description of him pulling on the ears and the nose and the lips of Leslie Wolfe. It's just a great description, and I love that a fan ran into the ring and got a kick to the head. Now, again, I do think a lot of these articles were written by Mac Lillard, so, some of that stuff could be flowery or like the kind of thing where he would put that in the paper to try and get people to come the next week. But it could also be very, very true. 1935, someone could have rushed the ring. And as we go through this, we will see that the paper does throw in like little things that happen in the crowds. And this is sort of the first one in the research we've been doing here, just October, November. But anyway, There you go. So that's going to do it for this episode. Thanks for listening. November 11th is the 90th anniversary of the dedication of the Armory, so that is kind of cool. And thanks for listening, and let me know what you think, and we'll be back soon with another episode. Goodbye, everybody. Well, that's going to do it for this episode of the Klamath Armory Wrestling Podcast. For links to the resources I used for this episode and to see the entire rankings for the month of October 1935, visit KlamathArmory.com. This podcast is a production of Saturday Morning Media and made possible thanks to the support of the channel members over at the Solo Promoter YouTube channel. Consider supporting the show by becoming a member today. Visit solopromoter.com and then click on the Join button for more information. You can also tell a fellow wrestling fan about the show or leave us a review wherever you get your podcasts. Thank you so much for your support. The Klamath Armory Wrestling Podcast is copyright 2025 Saturday Morning Media, Grant Bachoco, executive producer. All rights reserved. www.saturdaymorningmedia.com.
You've been listening to Saturday Morning Media. Stay tuned. We'll be right back.